Voices from the Vault is brought to you by the Shelter Island Historical Society. This story was researched, written, and read for you by Mariah Moore. Grissel Brindley was born to Thomas and Anne Brindley of London, England on the 6th of January, 1635, and was baptized 10 days later in the St. James Church in Clerkenwell, London. One of 12 children, Grissel was raised in comfort, her father being one of only 7 auditors to King Charles I. Auditors managed the king's money and lands, ensured taxes were paid to him in a timely manner, and answered almost directly to the king. When Oliver Cromwell began a civil war in England in 1647, Royalists, like Thomas Brindley and his family, were in great danger, and following the execution of King Charles I, Brindley was stripped of his rank and was forced into hiding. With no job, no prominent title, and no home, Thomas desperately needed a way to provide for his 9 living children, 7 of whom were girls. The way a father could provide for his girl children at the time was to marry them to successful men, and so Thomas provided for Grissel the best way he knew. The Sylvesters were family friends of the Brindleys, as fellow royalists, and they had an unmarried son who was moving to the New World as a part of his role in a joint sugar production venture. He seemed to be precisely what Thomas was looking for, capable of providing for Grissel, of similar political alignment, good family connections, and able to take his Grissel away from the dangers of England at civil war. So Grissel was married at 17 years old to a 42-year-old man, and sent with her sister and new husband across the Atlantic Ocean to begin a new life in that wild land. She never saw her parents again. Family lore says that the journey of their ship, the Swallow, across the sea ended in a shipwreck on Rhode Island's coast that resulted in no lives lost, but much of what young Grissel brought to make her new home sitting at the bottom of the sea. Things like dishes, candlesticks, tablecloths, bedclothes, and pitchers carried across an ocean in the hopes of furnishing a young, frightened bride's house in a strange land, only to be tossed by the waves and land upon the sea floor, where it would stay until it disintegrated in the salt water and was carried away in pieces by the currents. Despite this rocky start, Grissel and her husband Nathaniel said goodbye to her sister and brother-in-law in Newport, Rhode Island, and set sail again, this time for a much nearer destination, Shelter Island. The newlywed Sylvesters arrived on their island on a warm summer's day to find 12 square miles of woods, beaches, and strange people, with only a previous owner, Mr. Ferret's, old shack to sleep in. Within a year, Nathaniel, Grissel, and 2 of Nathaniel's brothers had built a house for them and begun to make a life that resembled the one they left. They acquired slaves and began farming their land. The Manhansett tribe, who populated Shelter Island exclusively until the intrusion of the Sylvesters, had sold land to James Ferret 10 years previously, and through that sale the land was bought by Nathaniel and his business partners. But the natives and new settlers soon found themselves at odds. The Manhansett's sachem, Yoko, came to Grissel and Nathaniel to inform them that James Ferret had bought only part of the island, not the entirety. The Sylvesters were dismayed by the revelation and took the Manhansetts to court up in the New Haven colony, where there was a formal court and judge. The court found that there was absolutely no evidence that James Ferret had bought all of Shelter Island from the Manhansett people, and so the Sylvesters bought the land again, this time from its native inhabitants. Across the sea, non-Anglicans in England were regularly being persecuted for their faith, and many were fleeing to the colonies in North America. Among these groups were the Quakers, a radical Protestant group that believed in nonviolence, plain speech, and the equality of all men. They didn't tip their hats in greeting or bow to the king, and this made them an easy target. But Quakers weren't welcome in most of the colonies either, outcasts even among outcasts. Of the existing English, French, and Dutch colonies in the New World, only Rhode Island and Little Shelter Island were friendly to those of the Quaker sect. These open arms brought many prominent Quakers to Shelter Island, both temporarily and permanently. George Fox, the founder of the Society of Friends denomination that was dubbed the Quakers by critics of their pacifist ways, visited the Sylvesters of Shelter Island and preached to the native islanders from their garden steps. Why the Sylvesters welcomed Quakers is much debated. It may be that they became sympathizers because of Nathaniel's relationship with Thomas Rouse, a Quaker. Some say it's because they themselves were Quakers, but there is much evidence to the contrary. They seemingly did not see the light of God in their Manhasset neighbors, but viewed them as lesser beings. Both were raised staunch loyalists, something that goes directly against basic Quaker beliefs. And a letter written to Grissel by a Quaker woman who had visited the little island rebuked the Sylvesters for not raising their children to adhere to the plain speech of the Quaker people. Whatever their reasons, Nathaniel and Grissel's openness to the refuge-seeking Quakers created ripples that mark our island to this day. Shelter Island is home to the oldest Quaker cemetery in the U.S., and Quaker meetings are still held here on Sundays. Much about Grissel Sylvester and her life has been lost to time, but we know that she took what was given to her and built a life out of it. In August, 2 years after Grissel and Nathaniel arrived on Shelter Island, Grissel gave birth to her eldest surviving child, Grissel II. In the next 20 years, Grissel had 10 more children who lived past childhood. How many she lost, we do not know, since records rarely make note of children who die before their first or second birthday. She brought plant cuttings with her on her transatlantic voyage to plant in the garden of her new home. She likely tended that garden, cooked family meals, raised her children, and walked the woods we know and love. While her life was not an easy one, she did not bear the household burdens alone. The Sylvesters had at least 20 slaves when Nathaniel died in 1680. Her husband was well off, and it is doubtful she ever wanted for food. She was a prominent member of her social circle whose children made advantageous marriages. In many ways, her life was as good as a woman in the mid-17th century West could hope for. After 39 years as mistress of Shelter Island, Grissel Sylvester died at 56 years old, having lost her husband 7 years previously, but surrounded by her children and their children in the home she and her husband had built with their own hands. A peaceful woman, Grissel lived through both an English Civil War and a Dutch-English territorial war that included and threatened her little island. After this, Shelter Island was able to stay free of wars for nearly another 100 years, but that's a story for another day.